following show is paid for and brought to you by Peter Savio and Savio Associates, LLC. Capital Convo on AM 690 and FM 94.3. The Answer is brought to you by the Savio Group of Companies, with the belief that we can solve all of our state's problems, including housing, by understanding the issues. We are ready to talk, and we want to hear from you. Join the convo by calling 833-296-TALK. Capital Convo is now in session.
Hey, aloha, this is Elijah Pierick. Welcome to the radio show. This is a state representative from the west side of Oahu, and I've got two guests with me today. We're going to start with one and go to the second. So go ahead and share with us your name, what you do for a living, everything that we should know about you.
Aloha. My name is Benjamin Rex. I am a retired Army. Did about 32 years in the Army total. Retired back in 2019, and my current job is to remodel my home, basically. I'm a handyman, so between my house and other people's houses. Have a degree in political science and business, but otherwise I'm just a handyman, staying busy and trying to be active within the community. I help with the TNR of feral cats and some other things around the community. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're a dog person.
I love dogs. I love all animals. I grew up on a farm, but we have 7 rescue cats in the house in various stages of illness that we're trying to nurse back to health. We never wanted 7 cats, but we have 7 cats because it's either that or they would have probably not survived. So we do what we can and taking care of them.
Wow. Okay.
But I do have 5 children. They're all grown, 6 grandchildren. I try to stay active.
Good job. Well, thank you for your volunteerism to the cats and the community at Royal Kunia on the west side of Oahu. Yeah, and we have another guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Joelle C. Shell, and I live in Palolo. I have 7 chickens and a dog. I also have a husband and 2 fish. I currently work full-time in real estate.
Wow.
I'm also the vice chair of community service for the Hawaii Republican Party.
Wow.
And I worked for Walmart from 18 to 30, so 12 years of that. The last 8 years, I was managing business operations, so that is where I would say the vast majority of my working career experience comes from, is just managing business operations, but then mostly just working with people is what it is at the end of the day. And in my spare time, I obviously am volunteering with the Hawaii Republican Party. I'm looking to see and help facilitate growth here on the islands. I think that the majority of people out here actually live conservative lifestyles in their everyday practice. And I would just like to see that reflected when it comes to the policies and legislation at our state capitol. I think that the people are not being served the way that they could be, and I see lots of room for improvement as far as that's concerned.
Well, I'm with you there. So thank you so much for being on our show, Joelle. And thank you so much, Ben, for being on the show. Today's show is going to mainly be framed around the military and Hawaiian relations. So we have our military expert, Ben Rex. He served as a lieutenant colonel in the Army at USERPAC. So over all the Pacific, he helped out with policy. Is that correct?
Yes, for human resource policy, but we basically oversaw taking care of all the soldiers throughout, our Army soldiers throughout the Pacific region. Yes.
Nice. And then we have our Kanaka, Joelle. Share with us a little bit about your Hawaiian ancestry.
Yeah, so it actually roots back to Maui, but for a few generations, going back to my great-grandmother and a few beyond her, they've been living on Oahu. And my great-grandmother, at my grandmother's youth, after my grandmother had already graduated high school and actually joined the Marines.
Wow.
Yeah, my great-grandmother had decided that it was actually too expensive for them to remain on the islands, and that the younger children in that family would not be able to purchase real estate. So at that time, they had actually made a decision to move to California to be able to provide a better way of life for their children and their future. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a sad fact that I heard recently about basically 50% of all Native Hawaiians no longer live in the state. of Hawaii, and that's definitely very unfortunate, being priced out of their own home.
Yeah, that is pretty sad. So thank you for sharing your background about where you come from as Kanaka, and then yourself in the military. Let's start to talk about the divergences and the merging of the two. So what brought you to Hawaii initially in the military?
I was stationed in Hawaii in 2014, I think, through 2017. Did a few jobs as a lieutenant colonel, deployed a couple times, and we really loved it here. We had come here for our honeymoon a few years before that. And so we just really love the location for health reasons. You can get out all 365 days a year. You can walk, you can exercise, and with as you get older, health issues start to multiply. And so we decided when I retired in 2019, we originally went to Nebraska and had a really bad winter, and by we I mean my wife, decided she wanted to move back to Hawaii, which was a great decision for a lot of reasons, including health and everything else. And so we moved back here right before the COVID lockdown back in 2020, purchased a home, and kind of settled in for the long haul through COVID. But a lot of things about Hawaii make it a great place to retire. The cost of living, of course, is beginning to get to the point where even retired military can't afford to live here as well. But I mean, if you got all the Native Hawaiians leaving in the droves just because of not being able to afford it. So I don't know how much longer this is going to be manageable with the cost of living going up. At some point, things are going to have to level off, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, things need to level off, and they need to get better. And so I advocate for cheaper housing, cheaper electricity, cheaper everything. So I'm with you there.
Right. As far as the military, there are a couple of things about the military that definitely contribute to poor relations between military personnel, the actual military organizations themselves, and the Native Hawaiians and locals. And part of that is not respecting the local ways of doing things, from religious beliefs to respect for the environment, respect for the honu and everything around. And then little things that they do that I know a lot of people, it's not just the military that do it, but a lot of times you get soldiers who come into the state, they get a cat, for example, and they
CAT,
a feline, and they want a pet for their child, and then at the end of their 3-year assignment here, they realize after contacting the airlines that it's really expensive to ship that feline, that cat of theirs, back to their next duty assignment. So a lot of times they open their door and they let the cat go, think, oh, they can take care of themselves. And that's contributed significantly. And it's not just military who do that. It's, you have a lot of transient personnel on the island, and, it's a problem among all residents. And but the military definitely contribute to that. And in Germany, for example, a friend of mine came back from Germany and said that they would know German equivalent of Humane Society would no longer adopt pets to military families because they were finding so many of them abandoned afterwards that they just stopped adopting pets to military families, U.S. military families. And I think that's, being done by lots of different personnel, military people come here for a couple of years, decide they can't afford it, and they leave. They do the same thing. But you get a big transient population with the military, so they do contribute a lot to that. My wife actually was active when we were stationed here, trying to get the local military bases on the Army bases to try to formalize some trap, neuter, release programs to help sterilize the cats so they couldn't reproduce, and then they could humanely live out their lives, and then they're not bringing out litter after litter after litter. And I think being able to help, if the military could do some more things like that and fewer things like the Red Hill crisis, I think that would definitely help the military-civilian relationship significantly in the coming years.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. So what's your thoughts on all that?
Well, that's a lot to think about. I think that what you focus on expands. And so in any community, you can have people who are causing trouble and exacerbating problems. And I think that he's touched on some relevant issues that really make an impact on our community. So I'm not taking away from anything like that. But I do think that it's kind of a popular mindset to have just a negative feeling about the military in general. But I do think that being a part of America, first of all, is kind of a controversial issue within the historic roots of our state. So that's a whole issue in and of itself. And I'm somebody who likes to listen and kind of understand both sides, but I prefer to make reserves on my own emotional investment into things and kind of just be in a place of trying to understand and have a bird's eye view of all of the aspects that go into it instead of getting angry or resentful. Because if you stay resentful, your energy is going into that, and it can actually keep you from progressing as an individual in life. And so I think that there's opportunities in a situation like mine where, I don't have any VA loan, I don't have any kind of VA benefits, I don't have a GI Bill or anything like that, but I really respect and love our military service members who go off and fight for our country, fight for our freedoms, and work to defend us. And so that said, from my standpoint, even though I have to work in what seems like a little bit more, I feel like I have to work harder maybe than some military personnel who are living on the island to survive, pay my bills, and make a way for myself. But instead of feeling resentful towards anything negative that they've done, I try and focus on the opportunities that are there and available to me to make a difference and create a life where I could hopefully, I'm 36 years old, okay, and I don't have any kids, and I would love for God to bless me with a child, right? And if I could have one, that's probably realistically all I could afford. But I would love to have more than that. And again, realistically, I'm probably too old for that. But the fact of the matter is if you're considering parenthood, if you're considering carrying on a lineage and keeping, as a Hawaiian, staying in Hawaii, you do have to be cognizant of the fact that you're up against odds, right? So that said, I think that the military is comprised of our fathers, our brothers, our cousins, our sisters. They're comprised of our family, and a lot of times the individuals themselves are getting orders from higher up, and they're doing what it is they're supposed to do as per their job. And sometimes it's easy to be angry at individuals or lump your feelings of emotions on one individual, but the fact of the matter is that that person is probably not responsible for all of the negativity that we feel sometimes when we think about or see like really heavy issues like the Red Hill crisis, right? The Red Hill crisis, I feel like, stokes anger amongst local individuals to feel hate for the military, whereas it's not as simple as that. And so that's kind of just a loose, I guess there's so much details in what it is he said, it's hard to give a real concrete answer, black or white, on something like that.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
A lot of things come down to individuals and how we treat each other. In any society, relationships between different groups is what determines tranquility, peace, and how everybody gets along. You get military bases anywhere in the United States and Europe, and the population immediately outside the bases have a tendency, and again, my personal opinion, this is not the opinion of the United States government or Army or anything like that, personal opinion based on my experiences, my observations, the local population that live just outside the gate tend to dislike the military, even though their livelihood relies on it, and they have a tendency to want to take advantage of the military. That's more so in other bases. I haven't really seen that in local communities here in Hawaii. It's been a little bit more of a friendly environment. But as I raised my children, one of the things, we lived in Germany when they were young, and it was very important to me to teach them respect for the local population. So you will learn some of the language. You will learn, if you're going to the restaurant, you want schnitzel, you learn how to order schnitzel. I learned how to say ein Bier bitte very quickly because I wanted to drink a German beer. And you have to have that respect for the population and for the local community wherever you're at. And then when everybody in the military have that kind of respect for the local area, then the local area tends to have that mutual respect back for them. So, you get back what you give in many situations. And years and years ago, when I first came in, it seemed like more military personnel were concerned about setting that good, positive atmosphere when they went out into the community. You always had your idiots that went out there and raised trouble, etc. But for the most part, we in our leadership emphasized, you will go out there and you will be respectful. You will not cause trouble. You will not drink and drive. You will not do all these things that you shouldn't do. You shouldn't be disrespectful for their religion and their environment and things of that nature. And we felt that come back to us in a positive vibe in many situations. These days, I think there's a little too much of the me mentality in our country, and I don't think a lot of people go out there and think about that when they're throwing their trash out their window or abandoning their animals or whatever they're doing. And that's military, non-military, all of us. I think our society is a little too me oriented, and being 32 years in the Army, from the time I was 18 years old, one of the first things they taught us was an acronym: leadership, loyalty, duty, respect. Sorry, it's been a few years. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Sorry, it took me a while. I had to think about it for a second. I haven't had to think about that. And then I taught at West Point, and it's duty, honor, country. And, those, at a very young age, and my father was military for a few years, active duty, and then as a paratrooper as well, and then he did the National Guard for 21 more years. So I grew up with the respect for the military. And when I went to basic training and they taught me these things, I'm like, yes, that's something I can feel good about. That's something I want to be a part of. And I took that to heart. And many people from my generation did that to a certain extent, but I think it got less and less and less over the generations. I don't see that as much out of the younger generations in the military. And again, personal observations. But you see a lot of soldiers coming in, brand new soldiers, and they just they had cell phones their whole lives. They had all this technology. They had everything to answer whatever desire they had at the moment, and so they didn't have to sacrifice growing up on a farm or growing up without stuff. But anyway, that's kind of a little soapbox of mine about you get what you give to a community, and that's why I think it's important to get out and do stuff, whether it's trapping feral cats or picking up trash along the road, or just as simple as opening a door for somebody behind you. I do that all the time, and sometimes people do it for me, and I make sure to smile and say thank you. I think that's the type of thing that we should do for each other, regardless of what you're wearing a uniform or non-uniform or whatever. But anyway,
that's great. Yeah. So what's your thoughts? What's your personal experience with the military? Do you feel like they're a bunch of jerks or people trying to be sensitive to our culture?
From everything I've experienced, I have always had them treat me with the utmost respect and dignity. I've worked with them, and they've always treated me very much as kind of an honored friend, and they were always very respectful. So, my grandmother was a Marine, and then she also met and married a Marine, my grandfather, and he was an Irish gentleman, but he always told me that when he was a young boy, he could only ever think of being a soldier. And he kind of grew up with this nostalgic idea of what that meant, and had a very noble thought process behind it. And so when he went to Vietnam, he did 3 tours in Vietnam, and he's buried in Punchbowl. He's got 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, a Silver Star. The guy is, in my opinion, one of the coolest heroes that I have ever known in my life in real time. And he explained that when he went to Vietnam and he came back, he had a huge disconnect behind what he grew up thinking serving your country meant to how he was treated when he came back from his tours over there. And so, you know, as a Kanaka who comes and hails from military service members who were both Hawaiian, and then, you know, it was my grandfather being here in the Marines in Kaneohe Bay with my grandma, that's how they met, that ultimately produced my existence. So for me, I kind of have a tender-hearted place in my heart for the military. It's probably just narcissism at the end of the day. But again, you know, I've heard, we all see news reports, guys at a bar were fighting, and I think it's can be an intense situation when you have people consuming alcohol and you have high testosterone young men, and you know, when they get the alcohol in them, you know, everybody wants the girls, and the guys who are local feel very protective of their girls, and they don't want their girls going and getting with military guys. So I think that's in large part where I kind of hear consistent issue with, you know, fights in between people. Obviously there's greater issues that we could talk about, like Red Hill and other heated topics, but as far as my own personal experience, I've had nothing but, you know, good things to say in terms of how I've been treated. And yeah, that's what I got. I'm sorry I don't have anything real negative to say. I feel like maybe that's kind of the vibe that most people are on when they talk about the military being out here, but I don't have that in my heart. I just don't.
Well, that's great. Yeah, thank you for your heart. I've served in the Air Force for 3.5 years. My dad joined the Navy in 1989, and he's still in the Navy. He did 7 years of that time reserves. So he's a Master Chief with a group in Fort Island. And before that, you know, I have an uncle who served in the Air Force. I've got a great uncle who served in the Navy up to a captain as an XO for an aircraft carrier. We've got basically family members all the way up to the Revolutionary War on my side of the family. So I love America. I love the state of Hawaii. My brother Chaz was a reservist in Hawaii. And so I've definitely done a lot of service in Hawaii as a reservist myself. So I love the military.
I also am a daughter of the Revolution, incidentally, on my mother's side.
Oh, wow.
So I have a lot of pride about being Native Hawaiian, but then I also have a lot of pride about the fact that my ancestors were here before the Statue of Liberty. Do you know what I mean? And so it's an interesting mix, and it just goes to show that you can't just look at somebody and by the external data or markers make assumptions about their ideological belief system, right? So I kind of don't fit inside what I think normal people, locals on the island, think that I would think, but I'm happy to dialogue with anybody and, you know, just come from a non-divisive mindset too. I think that kind of how he was touching on, you give what you get. And I think in this day and age, a part of the problem, I saw a report that said something like, if you're born in the United States of America as opposed to any other country in the world, you are something like 374% likely to be born fatherless. And I think that if you think about the idea that your father is the first person in your life to choose you, and if you grow up fatherless, that creates a vacuum and a wound that can't really, in my opinion, be ever truly fixed unless you go and cultivate a relationship with God, because we're created in God's image, and because God is our heavenly Father, I think that we're automatically downloaded on the earth with this built-in desire to have a strong relationship with Father. And so, like he was touching on, you know, unfortunately, a lot of times hurt people. So when you have generations go to war and the fathers aren't there in the households, and then they come back and they have PTSD or are troubled, or they don't come back at all, then you have these generations of men who grow up without fathers and don't really know how to be the type of father that they maybe wish they had. They didn't have the example. And then you have just the whole, you know, welfare state that kind of cultivates and encourages single parent households. And so just to kind of tie that back, I think that what we need more of on the islands and throughout our nation is more unification, more love, and more compassion for each other, as opposed to trying to divide each other and put each other into like boxes that we might not even ideologically fit into, you know? And so that's my mindset on it.
Well, great mindset.
Some great comments you made there. Great points. I'm a big sci-fi fan. I love all the Star Trek, Stargate, Star Wars, all that stuff. And one common theme among the sci-fi movies and shows is once you get to in order to get to a level of advanced society, you have to get to a point where it's no longer about me. It's about what did Spock say? The good of the many outweighs the good of the few or the one, or something to that effect. You know, not trying to steal. I'm quoting that back to Spock, Leonard Nimoy. And in order to become an advanced society, you have to, as a society, get past the individual being so important and it all about me, which I think is a really big problem with our society right now. Is everybody has grown up with all this technology and all this instant gratification, and to follow on with that, with the point is a big part of that is also having accountability from our government and from our leadership and from ourselves. I mean, self-accountability is where it starts, but we also have to have our leadership, whether it's military leadership or civilian leadership, accountable. So going back to the Red Hill water crisis, when that first came to light, where was our government saying, hey, Navy, we're going to come take a look at this, and if you're lying to us, we're going to fire you. Not promote you and not move you somewhere else. We're going to fire you. And by the way, you might go to jail. But unfortunately, a lot of these and I don't know all the details of who did what and who said what, so I'm not accusing anybody of lying or whatever, but to not put information out is a lie of omission as well, in my opinion. And I think there were a lot of, and of course I'm Army, so beat Navy. And as a Army person who was in uniform at that time, or actually no, I was a civilian employee at that time, an Army civilian, and we were trying to assist the Army soldiers and families who were impacted by this, because a lot of those impacted were military members living in military housing, and they had no water to bathe with, to drink, etc., and they were being put in hotels for months and months on end. Imagine moving into a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom hotel room, which is really small. You know, we do it every time we relocate from one assignment to another, but to live there for months and months on end because somebody messed up the water, that's very difficult on the family. But it seems like there was a total lack of accountability and responsibility from those in charge, both on the military and civilian side of things. And honestly, we have a civilian oversight of the military for a reason, to keep people honest, to keep our leadership honest, to keep our soldiers moving in the right direction, to keep the values and ethics going in the direction they need to go in order for our society to operate efficiently. Had that come out in the news and something happened in whether the Navy or the government come in and said, okay, what's going on? We're going to figure this out, and we're going to do something about it, and we're going to do it quick, and we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again. The local community would have still been upset, but to have it come out and again and again and more, oh, now we know more, now it's even worse, now you'd let it happen again, now you have a third time, or whatever the case was. And you can't blame Native Hawaiians and any local who's here for being upset with the military, because they feel like they've been lied to, and now they feel like they're being poisoned. And there are other topics that come into play as well. In addition to that, the use of land and Native Hawaiian land that was all confiscated from the Queen back in 17 something or other. I've read it. I don't have a good memory for facts and dates, but so there's a lot of different reasons that factor into that as well. But just having that government accountability come in and help, take action. When something is not going right or something comes out, somebody needs to come in and take action, see what's going on, and do the right thing, and make things right. And I don't really see that happening as often. From my perspective, working for the Army headquarters, the Army's, I was in meetings. None of it was top secret or classified or anything like that. But the meetings I was in, I would hear the generals, and the way they were responding to it was they were like, all right, how can we take care of our people? How can we do what's right by our people and make things right? I was very pleasantly surprised, not, I would say surprised, but it made me feel good to hear the responses that my generals had to the situation. They weren't bad-mouthing the Navy, their counterparts necessarily. What they did in their own mind, I don't know. But publicly, of course, you don't do that. But the way my leadership responded to it made me feel good about the situation. But when it's a Navy situation, what the Army does doesn't really have that much impact on the situation. So I see good leadership out there. I'm not sure I see good leadership out there at the federal level in the government. I don't watch a whole lot of news, but it gets very disheartening. All the scandals going on out there, and it's just really hard to watch news anymore. But that was my soapbox there. But yeah, just talk about accountability, responsibility. That's where it is for me. And if you have that and you show that within the military, and then you apply that to your relationship with the local population around the military bases, and then you provide jobs and you provide income, and you become part of the community where you're at. And if you're not part of the community, of course they're not going to like you. So I think we should all just get along.
Yeah, let's all get along. Thank you for that, Ben. For those of us who are just now tuning in on the radio, you can call us and be a part of the conversation by dialing 833-296-TALK. Again, that's 833-296-TALK. We're coming to you live from Kalihi. So if you're in Maui, Kauai, Big Island, you can join us in Oahu. Joel, a question for you. What have you learned growing up as a Native Hawaiian? Like, what did your family instill in you that's specific to being a Hawaiian?
Well, my Hawaiian grandmother was the one family member out of all of my family, aside from my immediate family, that was the most important in terms of the amount of time that she spent with us. And she was so proud of her Hawaiian heritage, and she always wanted to make sure that I knew that I was Hawaiian, and that was a really special and important thing. And she danced hula when she was young, and to a point where she went and she danced for President Eisenhower. Wow. And she was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and she was also some kind of Marine belle or something like that. Like, they have all these kind of like pin-up photos of her that are Marine photos, but she's holding the paddle in a hula skirt and stuff. It's really kind of weird and interesting. I don't think that they would do that in this day and age, the Marines, but it was, I was always just very proud of her. But, I'm not just Hawaiian. I'm also a mix of a bunch of different cultures. I'm 8 things to be exact. So I say that I'm a European Hawaiian, a Euro Hawaiian. And so I always just keep that in mind. I'm very, very proud of my Hawaiian heritage and the roots. And my grandmother, it was really important to her that she instill in me that I am Hawaiian, and that this is the culture that she grew up in and that she wanted to instill in us. But at the same time, I've always just kept in mind that I'm a conglomeration of a bunch of different things. So I keep an open mind and an open heart to that. And I don't like the idea of feeling a sort of an elitism, right? Or feeling that I'm better than somebody, or that I have more entitlements to certain things. I think that it becomes complicated even in my own head, because there are moments where I can feel that way, right? That I'm Hawaiian, all this land belongs to me. Just kidding. But I think that there's moments where you could think that, you could let your ego or your feelings about yourself being something take over the reality of the fact that you're just a human being and everybody else is too. and we're supposed to be equals to each other, be loving towards each other, and nobody is better than anybody else. And so that's what I end with at the end of the day. And I think it's good for me to be a mix of these different things to keep me grounded and to just remind me that I'm not any one thing more than I am just an American at the end of the day.
We're definitely very patriotic and very equality minded when you think about it. Do you think our brothers and sisters on the island that are 100% Native Hawaiian or majority Hawaiian, what are your thoughts on them when they have that mindset of this is my land, everybody get off, unless you're Hawaiian?
I kind of have respect for it, you know. I feel tender-hearted about it, and when I listen to how they feel about it, it's difficult for me to counter that, right? I think that they have validity in what it is they're saying and what it is they're feeling. But again, I always create a boundary of emotion within myself, and I make sure that I'm checking myself when it comes to being past a point of productivity for my own well-being, right? And so, I mean, you can't argue the historic roots of our state, the annexation, the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. There are some really real issues that you could point to and say that this is kind of an illegitimate situation, right? And so for me, again, I just try and listen, but at the end of the day, I always come back to the fact that we still bleed the same. We still ultimately want the same things in life. No matter how big of a difference in mindset you have with someone, you probably at the end of the day want to be loved, want to be respected. You want, the best for your kids. You want the ability to succeed in life and be able to provide nice things for your children and your family around you. At the end of the day, I feel like even the people who have the most divergent, controversial opinions from each other, at the end of the day, they actually have more in common with each other than they do different, right? So I don't have any answers or solutions necessarily to the controversial points of the military being on our islands, but I do think that we're just called to love each other at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Absolutely. A lot of great points you made there, and I agree with a whole bunch of that. I believe you have to have some love and pride in where you came from. Your people, your original, where did your family come from? I love genealogy, so I've been trying to trace back family roots, and it's got back to Ireland and England and Germany and Switzerland. I'm about 40% Swiss, which is why I'm such a peacemaker, I guess. Very little German, I think. So. I think it's important that we should have pride in where we came from. I think that's natural, and I think we should have that, but it should never be to the detriment of another group, just like she said. It's, yes, I love where I came from and I'm proud of that, but that doesn't make me better than you. That makes us the same. And you talked about the annexation of Hawaii, or however the illegal capture of the Hawaiian Islands, and the more I read on that, the more it bothers me. And I mentioned to my wife the other day, I'm like, don't you should we feel bad, that we bought property here and whatever? And, I feel like, we're contributing to the problem, even though it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And she said, well, did you feel bad when we bought a house in Nebraska? Well, I didn't, but now I do. And where I grew up in Indiana, Northeast Indiana. I just read one of my cousins posted thing about the Miami Indian tribe of the Indiana, Ohio, Illinois area, and how they were forcibly relocated from central Indiana, northern Indiana area down to Oklahoma. And now it's the Miami tribe of Oklahoma. There's still some remnants in Indiana, but it's like, the entire United States and, has went through that whole thing with the Native Americans. And then, and I will blame the Navy on the takeover of Hawaii, because that was a Navy guy who got involved.
But I want to say
it was the civilian businessman who brought in the captain of the boat, who brought his Marines that came over and helped do, like provide security and all that, all those soldiers with rifles and stuff there kind of kept any kind of uprising from taking place. So being Army, I'm going to blame it on the Navy.
Well, I would just say, going back to what you were mentioning about accountability earlier, I think that it can become a very dangerous thing where people are made to feel guilty and that they should be taking on the wrongdoings of ancestors past who aren't even around. And so I don't believe in making people feel guilty about their race or putting ancestral wrongdoings on the current generation. I think that at a certain point, again, what you focus on expands and energy flows where attention goes. So it's really important to stay present and not be spending too much time trying to figure out how guilty you should feel based on how much history is unearthed. If you go back far enough, every single one of us is probably going to have a serial killer, a murderer, or a rapist in our ancestral line. Maybe not, but I'm just saying, if you hunt long enough and far enough and deep enough back into the past, you could be, and you were going to take on that guilt onto yourself. You could be feeling guilty for every crime under the sun that you didn't actually do. And so at what point do we come together and neutralize and try and unify and actually address the core issues that are actually holding us all back as citizens in the here and now? Because if we continue to remain divided and we continue to feel like we're at odds with each other and that we're enemies with each other because of things that happened when we weren't even born and alive yet, then we can't advance on the things that would have the most substantive, heaviest benefits for our lives, like reducing taxes or lowering regulations so that we can build more houses, so that we can lower the cost of living. And additionally, when it comes to the idea of Spock, I think that it is important to have a certain level of selflessness when you are trying to make an impact and positive change. But I also don't believe in the idea of collectivism, where you're making decisions as a society for the whole. I believe in individual responsibility and accountability, and I also believe that each individual is going to know best how to live their lives. So I think it's important for us to have small government that stays out and allows people the freedom to make decisions on how they want to build and construct their own individual life. And I think that, kind of like a speech that you and I heard the other day, the role of the government is to create as many doors of opportunity for people as they can, and then step back out of the way for people to then walk through whatever door they want and make the most of their life. In this day and age, it does feel like, for a millennial like myself, that there's not a lot of opportunity. You cannot have a single income household be able to take care of kids like that. You have to have dual income, especially out on the islands. There's so many things that we're up against that we need to unify as people who are all neighbors and ultimately family with each other on the islands, so that we can actually vote and make changes when it comes to legislation here in our state.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely, and we are. No matter where you're from, you're still a melting pot. They say American, the melting pot of the world, and we are. And I think everywhere is like that. Native Hawaiians. Well, which island are you from? Because they weren't all one at one point. They warred and overthrew each other and back and forth, and eventually they unified, but that was through bloodshed. Oftentimes Native Americans, they would fight all the time, and they didn't just we won and go home. They murdered every male and of adult and child age, and then they took the females. And so sometimes you gotta, like you said, just remind yourself we all came from somewhere, but it's what we do with it now, taking accountability, taking responsibility, being able to be involved within our community and our political system to where we can help contribute to some of these positive changes. One of your biggest campaign things you went on was government accountability, and quite a few other things you've talked about. But yeah, absolutely, we should be the term limits, the political campaign contributions for our federal politicians who raise millions and millions of dollars. And who are their donors? They're the people who want them to vote in their way on some big business related thing. To me, that's a bribe. If I did that with something, it would be called a bribe. But why is it okay if a politician does it? So, and there are different types of contributions, and I understand they're different things. But when 3M is contributing to the
sticker company, the glue.
Yeah, the glue, earplugs, whatever. I mean, they make so many things. If they're contributing to Senator so-and-so, who's on the Senate Armed Services Committee, who will give them big contracts for such and such.
Masks.
Yeah. Yeah, masks, earplugs. I mean, they made a defective earplug. There's a big litigation right now with 3M earplugs. They made earplugs. They knew they didn't work, and they still issued them to hundreds of thousands of soldiers who now have tinnitus and all sorts of hearing loss. But, for me to give money to a senator, congressman to run for re-election, that's one thing. But when you let special interest groups donate money, big amounts of money, now that looks more like a bribe. Because I can't give you enough money to make a difference. $20. I don't think you're going to vote my way for $20. But if I handed you a check for $1 million, that might be a little bit more tempting to, reconsider how you vote on things. And our politicians at the federal level, you see them changing their opinion on things all the time, and that's natural. But when it follows immediately after a big campaign contribution, something's not right. So, but accountability of holding our political personnel accountable and to make sure they're doing things for us and helping us as a community, as a nation, get better. I think that's extremely important now more than any time.
For sure, yeah. I just want to provide some disclaimers. I'm sorry to hear that the Navy or the Marines were a part of that overthrow, but I'm assuming that the Secretary of the Navy didn't know that, or if he did know that, I'm hoping he didn't endorse it. I think there was probably some miscommunication from what happened on Oahu all the way up to the Secretary of the Navy.
I believe, and I read the history, and I'm not a historian, but I believe it was an individual decision by that ship's captain who brought his Marines over. And I'm sure he thought he was doing what was best at the time, but it was big, local businessmen, the wealthy businessmen who basically said, hey, come protect me. So they, I'm sure, justified it as protecting American interests over there. And I do believe they did it without asking for permission from anywhere else. And fairly recently after that, Congress basically came out and said, hey, that wasn't right what we did there. But then, money keeps following the trail and nothing ever really happened. So I think Jimmy Carter issued an apology.
Bill Clinton.
Or Bill Clinton, thank you. My memory's terrible. I think I mentioned that in the beginning. But okay, we apologize. Now what? Where do we go from there?
Yeah. When I went door to door, one of the ladies I talked to, she asked me, give us our land back. Because I asked her, what can I do for you if I get elected? And she said, give us our land back. And then I said, so do you want me to introduce a resolution? I think I said this. I'm going to introduce a resolution where we surrender the state of Hawaii back to the Kingdom of Hawaii. And she smiled and said yes.
Well, the trouble with that, and there are some people who subscribe to that idea, is that we would be very vulnerable. All the infrastructure, majority of it is actually from the American influence on our islands. And so if America dipped out, then trust and believe it's just going to be the Chinese or someone's going to show up knocking at the door, and they're probably not going to have a constitution that reflects the freedoms that the United States government is supposed to allow for us. Now, you could say that we're kind of far off from what we should be when it comes to constitutional rights, especially out here on the islands. But it's a huge thing to unpack. It's not a cut and dry black and white issue.
Yeah, it's billions of dollars that would be lost to the economy if the military were to pick up and take all the military services out of here for any reason, whether it's independence or what. I think I read something, it was like $14 billion per year in lost revenue from government contracts, government salaries, 100 and some thousand, 102,000, I think, civilian jobs. That's, what's the population, 1 point some million? Now you take like 40, 50, 70,000 military out of here. That's what, 7-8% of the, I'm not good at math, sorry, of the population that's leaving with all their income. And then, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But, all that kind of money leaving, that's huge. That's a huge impact. And how do you make up for that? Is tourism going to stay up? Would tourism die because now there's no more protection of tourists here, and no longer have U.S. rights, etc. But I mean, people go to the Bahamas and things still, but that's a big financial consideration you have to put in there. How can you replace that income, or what do you do about that in that case? But definitely a difficult question.
Yeah. Do you know of anybody who would rather have the land of Hawaii be governed by Russia or North Korea or Iran or something like that versus Hawaii? Have you ever?
I've never heard of them wanting to be governed by another country, but just to have their own sovereignty essentially is what it is. And I can understand that. And in some part in my brain, it does make sense, right? But in terms of them desiring that. But the reality of what that would actually mean is not, I think, what they envision it would end up becoming, unfortunately. So I don't have any answers, but I think that there's real legitimate things to consider in terms of wrongdoing. But when you think about a solution, I don't have the answer on the solution on that. It's not an easy thing to come to a conclusion on.
Yeah. It would be nice for the people of Hawaii to have their own country back and for them to be sovereign and not in fear of another overthrow. It just seems really unlikely, though, with China being as aggressive as they are off their coast, why they wouldn't consume Hawaii if Hawaii were to dip, if America were to dip out.
Right. I mean, well, I think that Taiwan has, in part, us to, thank for China not already going in there. So there could be a statement like, oh, well, America could still make some, protections without Hawaii being a part of America. But again, if you look at what's going on between China and Taiwan right now, there's constant kind of like overhanging or looming fear that they are going to be infiltrated by China. So, yeah, I'm not a geopolitical expert by any means. Far from it.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any kind of middle ground, like with the Native Americans, where they've got their sovereign nations, they have their own Native American police force, and et cetera, where you can have citizenship, but kind of a dual citizenship, and then there's a lot of government land that was seized from the Hawaiian royalty. Maybe there's some combination of giving back some of that land so that then there's a sovereign location and there's some self-rule type of stuff. I'm not real familiar with Native American self-rule and sovereignty and all that stuff, but there could be some type of middle ground where you get some self-control and then the land's back and you can feel a little bit more independent while still having the security of the U.S. military keeping all those other countries at bay. Because if we leave, who's going to come in? Like you said, I don't think it's going to stay vacant forever. I don't think Hawaii as a kingdom would stay that way for long.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for contributing, sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much, Joelle, for sharing your thoughts and giving us the Hawaiian perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 5 to 6 p.m. to hear updates from your Republican caucus, your public servants who are advocating transparency. Aloha and God bless.
Capital Convo on AM 690, FM 94.3. The Answer was brought to you by the Savio Group of Companies, with the belief that we can solve all of our state's problems, including housing, by understanding the issues. Join the Convo every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. right here on The Answer.